Alright guys, this one's going to be a wild one. It's going to be very personal for me, and it's also staying on the theme you might have noticed from the last couple of videos of fascism. So my story of this starts when I was in Croatia with my friends that live there in Zagreb, just having a conversation, and I think the conversation got brought to tattoos, and I spoke about my cousin's tattoos, which is just a letter U. And I remember he showed me when he got it done, and I was like in primary school, so I didn't think much of it, and I just chucked it in the conversation to my Croatian friends, and they looked at me with faces I've never seen them make before, of like shock and horror, and they had to double check what I said. And once they confirmed and had a bit of a back and forth with each other in Croatian, they turned to me and said, "We think your cousin might be a Nazi." And that brings me to this tweet I wrote. So this is a tweet from the start of 2021, roughly. Many years ago, my cousin got a tattoo, and now I've worked out that it is the Croatian equivalent of the Nazi swastika. He cannot play the ignorant card on this. The way I see it, you'd only get a tattoo of a fascist symbol if you know what it means and you agree with what it represents. I'll make him look at photos of atrocities and then tell him to never speak to me or my brother ever again. No matter who you are, when it happened, or who the victims were, there is no pride in genocide. And now let me show you how the little back and forth via text message went with my cousin. So on a Tuesday at noon, I said to him, "So what's the deal with your U tattoo?" And a little while later he responded with, "What about it?" And I responded to him with, "What does it mean?" He responds with, "Google Ustasha, Croatian army during World War II. Our dida and our family were in the Ustasha." So I did what my cousin suggested, and it made me question if he's ever Googled it, because the first thing you see is this. Note the picture in the corner of a drawing of a soldier with the Nazi flag and the Croatian flag. First thing you see on a Google search. And then the first piece of information you get on Google is this. The Ustasha, Croatian Revolutionary Movement, commonly known as Ustasha, or by Anglican version Ustasha or Ustasha, was a Croatian fascist, ultra-nationalist and terrorist organization which was active as one organization between 1929 and 1945. Wikipedia. Founder Ante Pavelic, founded 7th of January 1929. So by now I'm thinking, yeah, my cousin is definitely a fascist and he is definitely an idiot, because especially after this Google search where I saw the years that this was an operational group, so I thought I would check his claim that our dida was one of them, and dida is Croatian for grandfather, and I did that in a very simple way. Asked my mum, "Oi mum, when was your dad born?" And she told me the same year as my mum, so I now know that both of my grandparents were born in 31. And then I used my basic math skills. I can say that my grandmother and grandfather were about 10 years old during the Second World War, so I think that debunks my cousin's claim. And now I need to give fair warning for what you're going to see in my response to him, because I did what would only make sense and prove that I Googled it. And so I'm about to show you some of the most horrific pictures I've ever shown on this channel. And so the idea behind sending these pictures, other than because I said I would, and also to prove that I Googled them like he suggested, is to kind of infer, like, is this what you're proud of? Is this what you want to represent? And so I sent him pictures of piles of bodies that came up in the search, of people being killed in horrific ways. I sent him pictures of the leader with Hitler and with Mussolini, and of course that picture that came up right up top of the search of the drawing. And then I sent him this bit of this video.
We know that in the independent state of Croatia between 1941 and 1945, 74,762 children under the age of 14 lost their lives.
I would also like to mention that because this is pretty heavy stuff, and because I'm fortunate enough to know a variety of fantastic people, I thought I would reach out to my lawyer friend who is particularly positioned to be great for advice and information in this particular field. They were very helpful. I know they'll see this eventually, so thank you again. And it was also great just to have someone to laugh with at my cousin when he responded to me after all those pictures with this. If you want to catch up and ask questions about you, our Baba and Dida were children of them. Want to know about my other tattoo, my brother, your godfather? Let me know and catch up sometime. I've never stopped loving you or any of our cousins. You have never grown up. When you do, in here for you. So the person that discusses the issues of fascism with lawyers in their downtime needs to grow up. If you couldn't already tell, I'm doing my best to stay calm throughout this entire recording process. But as this all was evolving, I have been fuming. Oh my fucking god. Tell me to grow up, you fucking clown. Alright, carrying on, I reckon after he told me to Google them, perhaps he must have as well, probably for the first time. And also done some basic math and worked out that our grandparents aren't the right age to fit his narrative, so he had to go back a generation. I can't really speak much on my great-grandparents, and the most information I got out of my mother about them was they died in the Second World War. With all that said, I would just like to make it very clear that our grandparents, my Baba and Didor, came to Australia with their 6 children, one of them being my mum, one of them being his mum, and they all came here when they were children, grew up here, met somebody, had children that were born here in Australia, born here in South Australia, Australian on our birth certificates. I just wanted to make that clear, that that's the case for both of us. Alright, to offer up a bit of an explanation on what the fuck must have happened to my dumbass cousin, even being on the other side of the world, and also to give warning, especially with the way the Australian government is going, of what happens when you don't keep the fascists amongst your population in check. Croatia failed to do that. Let's have a look at what happens. This was one of the few videos I could find in English. It's pretty old now. It's from the 90s, but it offers up important information and gives you a bit of a history of what happened.
Please be advised, the following report contains disturbing images.
Tens of thousands of Serbs, Jews, Gypsies, and anti-fascist Croats were murdered here by the so-called independent state of Croatia, which was a Nazi puppet government. More than half a century later, the precise number of dead is still unknown. 105 mass graves remain untouched. The monument was built in 1965 in what was then Tito's Republic of Yugoslavia. It was visited by Croats, Jews and Serbs alike, including Orthodox clergy, until 1989. That year, at a conference on Jasenovac, Croatia offered participants this ominous badge as a memento. Cast into the image of the memorial, the Ustasha U, in Croatia, a symbol as dreaded as the swastika. May 9th, 1999, Zagreb. A new generation of Ustasha sympathizers. The Tudjman government has been sanitizing a past it should long have publicly condemned, beginning with the Ustasha symbol. The so-called independent state of Croatia was created in 1941, carved from the wreckage of the former kingdom of Yugoslavia. It annexed all of Bosnia and reached east as far as the outskirts of Belgrade, the Yugoslav capital. The puppet state, headed by Ante Pavelic, took its cue from Hitler, lining up alongside Nazi Germany, Italy and Japan. Pavelic's Ustasha ruling party embarked upon its own Nazi-style program of ethnic cleansing, with Jasenovac as its burial ground.
The goal of the Ustasha was to create a state free of minorities, a state, a Croatia, which would have only Catholic Croatians.
The church followed Pavelić's orders to forcibly convert Croatia's Orthodox Christian Serbs to Catholicism.
So there was no hope for anyone who didn't fit the mold of the Croatian Catholic. And the results are clear. They speak for themselves: mass murder.
By far the most numerous victims were Serbs. Tens of thousands were brought in by the trainload, along with thousands of Jews, Gypsies, and anti-fascist Croats. They were murdered not by gas, but largely by hand and with appalling brutality. This man is being beheaded with an axe. This is a knife created and honed specifically to slit people's throats. This man was gagged with a brick and dumped in the Sava River, wired to a concrete block. Recent aerial photographs still show stains of dark soil at former Ustasha burial grounds. The Ustasha used a Catholic monastery within a stone's throw of Zagreb Cathedral as a storehouse for gold and valuables looted from Jasenovac victims. Buried among bones beneath the monastery floor were carefully inventoried gold teeth, wedding rings, jewelry, watches, and bracelets piled up by Ustasha camp authorities.
Jasenovac was nicknamed the Auschwitz of the Vulcans. This was a camp which had perhaps one of the highest numbers of victims for those camps without the apparatus of mass murder. As a result, it was one of the cruelest, harshest, most barbaric camps in Europe during World War II.
Jasenovac was never liberated by the Allies. In the final days of the war in 1945, it was torched by Croatia's fascist government, the Ustasha. Jasenovac was consigned to the history books. A Croatia whose president stated in front of journalists and army officers last December that he had, quote, solved the Serb question by reducing Serbs to 3% of the population. A Croatia still familiar with Ustasha symbols and swastikas.
And I found a video where a author is being interviewed after he's written a book about the camps in Croatia. It includes some important information that I think should be included in this topic, especially the last thing that he says.
With Jasenovac, a camp that, who did it house? How did they kill them? Why?
It's not one camp, it's a chain of camps. It's an empire of dozens of camps. The most notorious one was Jasenovac, but there were many others in which hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Jews, Sinti and Roma and other innocent victims were brutally, really brutally murdered by 57 methods of killing, which I am describing in the book. So almost 1 million innocent people were brutally murdered between 1941 and 1945.
So when you say 57 methods of killing, I mean, we don't want to get too graphic, but...
Better not.
But a little bit about what we know, please.
Burning you alive. Cutting your head with axes, etc., etc.
I mean, it's a horrific legacy, and I wonder to what extent modern-day Croatia, a democratic country, member of the European Union, has faced up to that past and responsibility for the perpetrators.
Did not and doesn't want to. And this is a tragedy within the tragedy. The Croats deny or try to deny the truth, to minimize the number of victims, to present a false picture of that camp. And I think as long as they are not admitting the truth, how will they educate new generations?
About this is we're not talking about a regime that was simply doing the bidding of the Germans. We're talking about local Croats acting out of presumably some form of Croat nationalism.
That's true. On the other hand, they imitated Nazi Germany. They adopted a very similar ideology. The Ustashism is like Nazism, like National Socialism. They were like brothers, like twins for Nazi Germany. Ante Pavelić, the leader, the Führer of Croatia, went very often to Berlin to learn more new systems, so they were very close ideologies.
And how much influence did the Germans have? I mean, was this just inspiration to commit horrific acts, or were they closely coordinated? What was the actual Nazi involvement here?
Everything what you have mentioned, but I have to emphasize that Jasenovac's chain of camps was operated exclusively by the Croats. The Germans visited there, were impressed by it, but even complained that the Croats were too brutal to their taste.
The Germans complained that the Croats were being too brutal.
Funny. It sounds funny, but yes.
It sounds unbelievable.
Let me give you one example. General von Kleistenau in 1942 visited Jasenovac and wrote a report in which he complained that the methods which he found in Jasenovac were too barbaric, too extreme. Can you imagine?
Extraordinary.
I want to make it very clear that I will never align with fascists. I made my decision a long time ago, and my morality means the most to me. Family means a lot to me as well, but that goes as far as my brother, because the next time I have to see this fascist that shares a set of grandparents with me, the first thing out of my mouth is, do you know what people like the Nazis and your fucking crew did to people like my brother? He was very quick to mention his brother. Let's talk about my brother for a moment. The non-verbal, autistic guy who's never done anything to anybody. I wonder if my cousin has ever put 2 seconds of thought into what somebody like my brother would have gone through under a regime that he looks up to. And so I'd like to wrap up this video with probably the last text message I ever sent to that fascist that shared grandparents with me. Here's a quote from a site that detailed the acts of the Ustasha. Here's just one of the many despicable things done by one of the many despicable people. They offered their lives in exchange for the mercy of their children. 2 children were placed on the ground, while a third was thrown like a ball into the air. Some disgusting Ustasha piece of shit pointing a dagger up missed 3 times, but the 4th time, with a joke and a laugh, the child was impaled on the dagger.